With Haru being the very first banner character to ever release in Chaos Zero Nightmare, there's been a ton of curiosity and discussion about how she actually performs, whether she's worth building, whether she's worth pulling for, and how her kit functions, alongside what her best team setups are now that the game's meta is starting to take shape. As the game's first ever featured combatant, Haru sets the tone for how future banners will be balanced, and understanding her playstyle early is important for players looking to start strong or reroll effectively. With this, she's an anchor type attacker who mixes strong single target damage and AoE potential through her card cycling, as she can rapidly scale damage the longer a battle lasts. But just like with any other character, knowing how to build around her AP costs and routine mechanics can make the difference between an average or insane Haru. But before we go any further, don't forget to drop a like, comment, and subscribe. With that out of the way, let's go over everything you need to know about Haru, the first ever banner character in Chaos Zero Nightmare. Haru's kit is entirely centered around her anchor themed cards, which combines repeatable damage with scaling potential over time. Her most important card is Anchor Shot, and this is the backbone of her entire playstyle. This single target attack starts with a solid damage multiplier, but becomes stronger after each use, stacking up to 5 times for increased damage. What makes this special, however, is that certain epiphany upgrades will cause it to return to hand after a critical hit, or some will even allow you to nuke and discard all cards in your hand in order to do a bunch of damage. Her secondary damage card, Power Anchor, covers AoE situations, as it deals 220 to 270% damage to all enemies, making it valuable in multi-wave content or against a cluster of enemies. When used together, Anchor Shot and Power Charge give Haru consistent damage for every single type of encounter, whether it's a boss or a floor with multiple enemies. Her skill cards, Anchor Pointer, Charge Energy, and Lift Anchor are what really tie the deck together though. Anchor Pointer is a zero-cost skill that allows her to retrieve Anchor Shot from the deck or graveyard, and this will ensure that she never runs out of her main damage source. Charge Energy will increase her attack card damage by up to 70% for one turn, and when combined with her core attacks, it sets up for a huge burst window. Finally though, Lift Anchor grants short-term damage increases without consuming AP, and this gives Haru extra damage and extends how long she can actually deal damage. Now her strongest epiphany combinations include epiphanies to her Anchor Shot and Power Charge, as they introduce retain effects and critical hit triggers that allow her turns to be smoother, but the cards that you'll generally want to remove are Anchor Drop and any early defensive variants, as while they offer survivability, they don't actually do much to increase how much damage she does and often will slow down or clutter up your deck. Haru's best decks as a result are those built around keeping her anchor cards in rotation and supporting them with short, high-value buffs to sustain her actual damage across multiple turns. Now let's talk about Haru's potential trees. Her early nodes, including epiphany bonuses and basic card upgrades, add universal increases to her damage and survivability, and these make runs smoother but don't necessarily dramatically change how she plays. Her first major spike appears at Potential 3-1, where she gains 20% damage to Power Charge and 10% to Anchor Shot. These upgrades alone provide one of the highest damage increases and should definitely be something you look into as soon as possible. Her potential on 5-1 introduces another crit increase, adding 5% to anchor cards, and in addition to this, it adds an additional 5% if her attack surpasses 500. This might seem like a small change, but it's pretty significant in terms of scaling that actually rewards players who focus, of course, on getting attack. Finally, her potential at 7 serves as her late game scaling, granting 10% Anchor Shot damage or doubling it to 20% once her attack reaches 1000. With this, the 3 nodes at 3, 5, and 7 form the important breakpoints in her potential tree, and this multiplies her damage output quite a lot rather than just adding small bonuses. The rest of the nodes focus on crit rate, crit damage, and small neutral card upgrades, and while these aren't necessarily as impactful as the major ones, they do still provide steady improvements, and since Haru of course is a DPS, you can focus on or take these if you'd like. When it comes to upgrades, Haru benefits the most from enhancing her primary cards before anything else though. Start by upgrading Anchor Shot and Power Charge, as these account for almost all of her damage, but the next focus after just choosing to upgrade these epiphany cards should be choosing the correct or most ideal setup for your deck. With this, cards that introduce pulverize or retain effects will be pretty important, as it allows her to cycle more, but once her damage cards are upgraded, you should then shift attention to Anchor Pointer and Charge Energy, as these are what set up the rest of your cards. Now let's move to Haru's build. Haru's build focuses on maximizing her attack and crit, which makes sense as she is a DPS. With this, her best setup uses 4-piece Line of Justice paired with 2-piece Blackwing or something like Executioner's Tool, and Line of Justice, in case you're curious, does grant a 20% crit damage bonus to 2-cost or higher abilities, perfectly fitting her core Anchor Shot playstyle. Blackwing adds 12% flat attack for a clean all-around increase, while Executioner's Tool does also add 25% crit damage and also remains a great alternative. If you don't have access to this, however, a 2-2-2 combination using Executioner's Tool, Blackwing, and Cursed Corpse can also suffice, and this setup, though offering a balance of crit damage and attack, really should just be a stepping stool or a transitionary period before you actually actually get a 4-piece set. For stats, you should prioritize justice damage and following this, attack percent on main slots, but then beyond this, stacking crit damage, crit rate, and attack is important on substats. Haru's attack should always, of course, aim for the 500 and 1000 thresholds to trigger her potential bonuses, but as usual, you should also try to maintain a rough 1:2 ratio between crit rate and crit damage, and this will result around 60 crit rate and 120 crit damage, though this may be difficult, especially if you're early on. For weapons that you have access to in the Chaos Manifestation, Obsidian Sword is a pretty safe and solid option due to its multiplicative damage boost to all abilities, and in addition to this, you could also use something like Bone Cutter, as it does add additive damage when enemies are weakened, which pairs well with the teams that you'll be using with Haru. Meanwhile, the Gastronomicon also applies the Agony debuff automatically, which does allow Haru to trigger bonus damage from sets like Cursed Corpse, but in terms of trinkets, Dimensional Cube is another pretty good alternative as it increases your damage, while Quantum Collector offers the highest burst ceiling with a stacking 20% multiplicative damage per upgraded turn. Partner-wise, her signature Asteria synergizes perfectly with its added damage, increased pulverized DPS, and 2-cost specific conditions, but if this isn't available, using Scarlet or Vitochka will work as well, since both have passives accessible through buff-related DPS increases or from having 2-cost cards. Now in terms of teams, Haru fits best when paired with AP Generation, Retain Synergy, and Card Cycling. Her strongest partners as a result are Mika, who is pretty much the best for everyone, and Kalipe, who also complements her high-cost, combo-driven kit with her own Retain and ability to draw cards. Mika herself is also pretty good at providing AP and card upgrades, and this of course will then let Haru chain her attacks together without much downtime. Mika's retain effects also allow Haru to carry crucial cards like Anchor Shot between turns, and this of course is pretty important in case you want to avoid downtime. Kalipe meanwhile offers sustain and protection while also reducing Haru's AP strain. Her absolute protection skill is also pretty notable as not only acts as a shield, but it also allows Haru to retain her entire hand if this is something where you're trying to prevent wasted draws. When paired side by side, Kalipe and Haru together are extremely powerful, and when paired with Mika as the third, the trio provides near perfect synergy, covering AP generation, shielding, and card cycling, all while keeping Haru's burst rotation actually intact. If you're a player who's struggling with sustain in longer fights though, a dedicated healer can also replace one of the supports, but doing so will also often reduce the total damage output, or in some cases, force you into more mind breaks. Even then though, Haru still remains one of the most consistent DPS options available, as her kit naturally scales with AP generation and buff uptime. Now in terms of pros and cons, Haru's greatest strengths come from her ability to handle both single target and multi-target scenarios with pretty much the same level of efficiency. Her kit scales extremely well the longer that the fight goes on, and her retrieval mechanics means that she's almost never really out of damage cards, assuming you have the AP. Combined with her ego skill that adds multipliers based on active buffs, Haru's damage potential is incredibly high, allowing her to put out some of the highest numbers in the game once she's fully set up. Her weaknesses, however, definitely come from her having high AP costs and actually taking time to ramp up. Most of her cards, unless you land some of the epiphanies, cost 2 or more AP, and this means that she can struggle without actual support. Additionally, her damage scaling depends mostly on cycling the same cards multiple times, and this can unfortunately make her feel slow in shorter battles or early runs. That said, once her setup is online and she's paired with the right teammates and cards, she becomes an absolute unstoppable machine of actual DPS. In the end, Haru is a pretty good showcase of what Chaos Zero Nightmare's combat system is all about. She's a character that is technically weak at first, but upon playing and learning more about her kit, you'll be rewarded with a pretty strong deck and the ability to scale indefinitely. Now, while she's not the easiest to use, mostly because of her AP costs and her need for cycling or card searching, the amount of damage that she does once optimized is definitely worth it, as she is certainly one of the most consistent and rewarding damage dealers in the entire game. Anyways, that's going to be it for today's video though, guys. Thanks again for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.